Yo, Molo Sanbonani, hello, how's it? And shalom, good evening. Welcome to Liberty and Friends, your weekly wrap-up show here on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. My name is Sikhle Ngobese, Big Daddy Liberty. I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me. As always, with this show, whenever you're trialing new tech, you need to make sure that, despite all the tests and that we do before the show, that when you're actually live, that everything is pashash and working. So if you see me looking down, I'm just looking at my screen where I am able to just do that quick test to make sure Alice is good. I'm going to wait for the commentary to sort of start popping in and for people to join us. I'm seeing that I am up, I think, on Facebook. There he is. The YouTube comments coming in loud and clear, says the Brew. I see you, homie. Bradley Murray, I see you, homie. Shout out to you. Deadman, thank you very much. On Facebook, I see you, Jane Gale. Welcome to it. Catherine McDowell, I see you. Guys, good evening and welcome, as I said, to the first episode of Liberty and Friends. That's Liberty and Friends. This will be your weekly late night show on a Sunday evening where we wrap up the week's top news and not only wrap it up, provide insight, analysis, and even a little bit of debate every now and then as we hopefully make this a real feature of your weekly viewing. Liberty and Friends, very briefly, will always have a panel of between 3 and 5 guests. That's 3 and 5 guests, a mixed panel, of course. I often do the work in the week of trying to get, the woke and lefty types to join us on the show because I do value a diversity of opinion. But what I really want the show to do is to do exactly that, for you to see all sides of the argument and also see how, when we have people who we consider to be ideological opponents, for example, how we dispel their arguments using topical stuff that you would have been aware of in the week. So guys, welcome to it. Please do me a favor, share this link. If you're watching on YouTube, please share the link out to your friends. And if you're watching on YouTube, of course, please share this wide and let's grow the audience. Guys, welcome to it. Welcome to it. If you're just joining us now, this is Liberty and Friends. I'm going to introduce my guest tonight. A quick word of apology. I could not add Ivo Vegter to the conversation. There was a technical glitch as I was doing the testing before this. There he is in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. Ivo Vegter himself saying, sadly, I had technical issues and couldn't join tonight. Ivo, I'm really sorry about that. I really wanted you on the show, especially because I wanted to discuss that wonderful piece you wrote on the Great Reset and whether the Great Reset, as has now become the talk of global politics, whether that is a conversation about more free markets and more liberty, or the opposite direction of more state control and statism, and indeed even a pining for socialism. I was really looking forward to having that conversation, but next time, I'm going to have Ivo on next week, hopefully even on the Big Daddy Liberty Show this Wednesday. That particular show, we're going to focus on lockdowns as we revisit, hopefully, some of the evidence as to whether a lockdown works or not. I'm hoping to have the guys on Panda again, and I'll definitely have Ivo Vegter on that show because I do think what he would have to say would be very topical indeed. With that being said, welcome to it. This is Liberty and Friends. I can see my guests are waiting in the lobby. Without further ado, let me just add to the show. Bear with me. It might take a second or so as I add everybody. And I do believe everybody is on screen. Yes, at the moment. Let me just welcome everybody from in a clockwise direction. Joining me from the Free Market Foundation, a voice who has been on the Big Daddy Liberty Show before. That's Martin van Staden. Martin, good evening and welcome to Liberty and Friends.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I look forward to getting into some of the issues of this week.
Awesome, brother. Really looking forward to that. Welcome to it. And of course, just below him, I have a young chap who is the communications. Well, I'll let him tell us what he does there. But he's from the Institute of Race Relations, as his mom disturbs him there in the background. Duwayne, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on the show. I apologize for that. I've been looking forward to being on the show for quite a while. I'm quite excited to discuss the issues. I must say, I feel a bit out of place by senior guys such as yourself and such intellectual
No.
heavyweights as Martin, Phumlani, and of course you, Sisley. But I hope I can contribute in some way.
Hey man, welcome to it. You are definitely one of the intellectual heavyweights. Thank you, by the way, for that compliment. Dude, I'm very glad to have you on here. I think you're going to add a lot of value to this. It's a very interesting campaign you guys are running at the moment at the IRR. We'll get into that a little later. And of course, last but not least, a man who I've been trying for a while to get onto the Big Daddy Liberty show, a very busy man at that, Phumlani Majozi. Welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks, Sihle. Yeah, it's been a while. We've been in contact, and then things would be, offside, be off track. But I'm glad you're here. It's great to see Martin. It's been a while. I see now he always has a hat. I like looking good, Martin. Well done on that. And Duwayne, great to see you. And I hope this will be a very nice chat, conversation.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. Just whilst I have you here, a quick reminder to you, dear viewer, if you're watching us on YouTube or on Facebook, hey, please share the link of the show. Let's grow the audience. Let's have some folks joining us and being a part, of the conversation. Liberty and Friends is exactly that. It's Liberty and his, broadly speaking, friends. And you are a friend too. So make sure that you get your questions and comments in. I will be keeping an eye on those, and I'll be throwing them to the panel throughout the evening. So guys, do not worry. I'm able to read both comments on Facebook and on YouTube, excuse me. So get those comments in, guys. As I said at the beginning of the show, I'm a little sad that we couldn't have Ivo, because he wrote a wonderful piece on broadly the Great Reset, and I'm sure you've seen this sort of floating about on social media as it sort of weaves the world of conspiracy and at times and really what is. Because there is a whole bunch of rhetoric from the sort of global political elites on this notion of a new normal, or essentially a resetting, if you will. Now, I'm not going to dwell on Ivo's piece per se, but let me just quickly touch on let me call it the latest movement on the issue of the response to COVID-19 around the world, and really lockdowns, and a tool that states have used as a response to this. So I want to get your general sense on this, guys, just as a general conversation generally. On this show, and I welcome disagreement, but on this show I've been arguing what the evidence has really been telling us, that lockdowns are a very repressive tool being in the hands of politicians, and really it doesn't actually work if you now see the body of mounting evidence against this. Martin, I want to start with you, because I know you've said you've written on this, I think, on social media, and I want to get your sense on this thing. What's been your sense on where the conversation is moving now on the issue of lockdowns, for example?
Yeah, so my approach has quite controversially, let me say that I didn't really care if it works or not. I am a jurist, so in many ways the Constitution is my Bible in this case. My concern is whether government is proceeding within the legal framework that we as citizens expect it to. I do not think that it has, but over and above the Constitution, I'm a classical liberal. I think that when there is an emergency, or when there is a cause for caution, I think we must err on the side of freedom. I don't think that is what's been happening. So I really consider myself an opponent of lockdown, whether it works or not. I think that the government really needs to give citizens the chance to protect themselves and their families and their communities from COVID. And I really hope that other South Africans are becoming increasingly aware of the ridiculousness of this nonsense, with people being arrested for the most trivial bullshit, really, and getting a criminal record. I'm hoping that this leads to a great awakening.
Absolutely. Phumlani, I know you've been very vocal online on just the crippling effects of lockdown on not only industry, people's employment prospects, and really just even the general psyche of the nation. I've seen you've had quite a few debates even on social media. Your take on where we are now, not only as South Africa and perhaps even globally, on a tool such as lockdown being in the hands of politicians, and whether you think it's even been worth it.
Well, look, it's been great harm all over the world. In South Africa, it was worse because remember that the state of the economy, when we when COVID-19 arrived in March last year, the state of the economy was terrible, even at the time, right? We had a few recessions since Ramaphosa came in. Unemployment rate was skyrocketing, as always in South Africa. Government debt was shooting up. It's getting to plus minus 80% now, which will approach 100% as a percentage of GDP. So, I mean, the economy was terrible. And when I say the economy, people think the economy is this some sort of a system where it's rich, mostly white people, trading and making money at the expense of the poor. No, I'm talking about small businesses in the country, right? I'm talking about the majority of the people, right? And if you want to talk about race, the majority of those people are mostly black people, right? If you racialize the issue. So, I mean, there's been a huge impact in people's lives. Let's not mention the economy, because if I mention the economy, it seems like we're talking about something else. But we're talking about livelihoods here. Because what I tend to get from journalists, I've done TV interviews and radio interviews since COVID arrived in March last year. The question tends to be, what do we do? Do we save lives, or do we reopen the economy? To me, it's lives versus lives, right? It's lives versus lives. And it's not a matter of, because I mean, if you are going to say right now we have plus 11 million people who are unemployed. Economist Mike Schussler and I wrote, I think a week or 2 weeks ago, an article where we said basically 1.4 million jobs are at risk right now, right? And these are people who will be out of the market, and we don't know when they are going to come back. Because business isn't coming back anytime soon. I read this week that one of the economists at the South African Reserve Bank said that they expect the 2019 GDP levels to come back in early 2023, right? So, I mean, we're in a situation where even those businesses that have shut down, we don't know when they're going to come back, right? You have kids, you are the breadwinner. We have to send these kids to school. You have to buy clothes for them. You have to buy food for them. Suddenly now there's no money, right? And government, they lock down and then they give you what? 350 rand, right? I mean, what do you do with 350? And so the economic impact, the impact in people's lives, has been very, very damaging. And there are many other things, negatives, that tend to be ignored, of course, with these lockdowns, and that is the level of depressions, the level of suicide, all those statistics. No one ignores those and rather focuses on saying that the lockdowns are the tool to fix the situation, of which it is. There's been much great harm over the disease that in Africa has, even by medical experts have said, Africa has done much, the death rates and how the pandemic has behaved in Africa. It can't be compared, to other sort of Western countries or Europe or wherever, where there's been a sort of a huge, sort of more greater impact of the pandemic for many reasons, including the age factor. Africa is the youngest continent in the world, right? Including the climate, the way pandemics behave, it's different, right? So you have young people now who have lost jobs in South Africa, right? Over a disease that they have a plus minus 90% chance of surviving. So we need to think about, need to think about what the impact has been here, and it's been enormous on people's lives.
Absolutely, and you're spot on, Phumlani. Duwayne, even as I come to you, I know you guys have been running a campaign or not necessarily a campaign, but writing extensively on the Daily Friend on this particular issue. Chewing on it from various perspectives with your various writers in that part of the world. But the IRR itself, let me be maybe specific. What have you guys have had to maybe do to respond to the lockdown that has been imposed? Has it changed maybe the way you guys work? Do you want to maybe briefly talk to me about that, very briefly, just to personalize this issue?
Yes, definitely. I think the lockdown has affected many workplaces, and it has forced companies to sort of become innovative in the way that they work. The institute, for example, has gone to sort of working from home, as it were. So our staff are now working from home on a permanent basis. You have to innovate in these circumstances. So that's how we were affected as staff and as individuals on a sort of personal level. But from a sort of organizational level, the institute also had to respond, and from day one, the institute said we have to end lockdown immediately. It was not a sustainable solution, and it wasn't going to help the situation that we were in, because the purpose of the lockdown, as the government said in the beginning, was to get our sort of public health sector, public and private health sector, ready to sort of respond to the wave that was coming. And then it just never stopped. The lockdown just kept coming, and even till this day, they call it adjusted level 3, but we never go back to sort of non-lockdown. We never go to normal. It's just adjusted. We keep adjusting to a different sort of oppression, the way I see it from my perspective.
And I want to bring up your perspective because, Duwayne, I know a lot of the viewers might not know this, but you've actually done something to try and actually fight back against what has been an absolute abuse by government in this country in its response, supposedly, to COVID-19. You want to maybe quickly talk to us about the court case that you had launched, you and a few friends, Tammy Jackson being one, who is also not a stranger to the show. But you guys launched some court action, and what was the outcome to that?
Yes, well, myself and a few others. Mpiake was one of those, and there's a few other people. Scott Roberts, who's also quite visible in the sort of liberty space in South Africa, and a few other people, as you mentioned, Tammy Jackson. But I was, as it were, the first applicant, so my name appeared on the court case, and so people tend to make a big deal of it. But yes, we launched the case sort of from a personal level. We felt that the government had overstepped their powers. They sort of stretched beyond what the Constitution allows the government to do, and we decided to go to the Western Cape High Court. The case was then obviously dismissed, and then we asked for direct access to the ConCourt, the Constitutional Court, of course, which is the highest court in the country, and that was denied. And so we had to go to the Supreme Court of Appeal to appeal the case in the Western Cape High Court. And waited a few months. This was a long, I'm very sort of summarizing the situation, but it was a long, drawn out process. And just as a sort of side note, I'm sure Martin, as someone in the legal field, will know the litigation was extremely expensive. And we have thanked everyone who contributed to the case financially, who donated funds. I just want to use this opportunity to thank everyone again, just for all of the money you guys sent in, because I mean, the paperwork alone cost us about 50 grand. And even though the attorneys, the advocates did it pro bono, it was still a lot of money that we had to pull together. But anyway, so the Supreme Court of Appeal then decided all of the regulations were justified that was made by the NCCC, aside from exercise and hot cooked food, because as Judge Clive Plaskett said, they were irrational and not proportional to what was needed from the government. And in some circumstances, they were even counterintuitive, because the excise rule that said you had to exercise within a certain sort of distance of your home, whereas you would have wanted people to be further apart from each other, then had the effect of having people closer to each other. So it just goes to show how the government then sort of legislated the lockdown regulations. But it's not the outcome is not what we wanted, because it's not a total win, but I feel it's still a small win, because in these sort of battle of ideas, as the Institute of Regulations like to say, every inch matters.
Absolutely. Martin, I must come to you because Duwayne also did rightly point you out on this issue insofar as you being a legal scholar and someone also who I look to on these particular matters. There has been a raft of South Africans who are simply challenging the state and the arbitrary, coercive, manipulative power of the state under the National Coronavirus Command Council. Your thoughts on some of these legal battles, and really, is this really I'll throw you an easy pass here, but is this really the only battle that we can wage as citizens, or should there be other means in which people can push back against the state? And how important is it for people to push back against the state?
Yeah, no, so briefly on the legal challenges, I wrote an article for the African Human Rights Law Journal at the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria late last year, specifically on many of the court challenges to the lockdown, and included in that is the Esau case, the High Court level of that case. And my conclusion there was very much that the lockdown is unconstitutional and that people are rightly taking it to court. And I really laid into the courts for, in fact, finding that the lockdown is constitutional. So I am not a scholarly friend of the courts in this case. Some of the courts got it right, but mostly we're heading in the direction where I think judges are really betraying a sense of, my goodness, we're really afraid of COVID, and government needs to help us all as South Africans, and we are not really in a position to strike down the lockdown. And I can understand that from a human perspective, but I think in many respects the judges may be betraying the Constitution. So that's a problem, and I hope when the lockdown eventually reaches the Constitutional Court, it hasn't yet, but eventually it must, I really hope the judges look inside themselves as jurists and find a love for the Constitution and for freedom, and find the lockdown to be unconstitutional. I'm not holding my breath, unfortunately. But then on your more substantive question, I would say yes, there are other means to challenge the state, and I always say this, and it bears emphasizing. You do not need to convince every single South African. You do not need to convince the majority of South Africans that liberty is right and that we must stand up for freedom. It would be great if we could achieve that, but that is not necessary. We just need a dedicated minority of people to push against the state. And I think throughout history, we've seen most global change has come about as a result of action by minorities, of dedicated minorities, of passionate minorities. And we must bear that in mind and not construct this mountain in front of us where we can't convince everyone. We shouldn't want to convince everyone. So write articles. If you're not a writer, post messages on Facebook, on Twitter. Believe me, it does help. It all adds up to immense pressure on the political class, which is broader than just the state. Journalists see what's happening on social media. That's easy. And if you're able to join protest action, I'm a big fan of in the street protest action, as long as you don't damage anyone's private property. I'm very much in favor of getting out there and showing your dissatisfaction with what the government is doing, and just use your voice. A lot of people really get caught up in despair and in defeatism, and they think, what the hell is the point, where we've lost so much? I'm just going to extricate myself from the discourse. When you do that, you guarantee a defeat. So place yourself in the discourse. You don't have to be an intellectual. Just say this is wrong. Liberty is important, and just keep saying it. And I think that is a recipe for victory in the long run.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Just a quick one.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can make a point here, Sihle. There is a big question in this sort of, if I can call it a debate, of should we lock down or not lock down. The question that I usually get is this: okay, so if we can't lock down, so what's the alternative? I mean, alternative to to save lives. I mean, so I'm just saying, my view is that the only way we have to handle this, unfortunately, and it's an unfortunate situation, it's a pandemic. We are in an unfortunate situation. We can't pretend as if things are normal, right? They aren't normal given the situation. The only way we have to manage this is to basically try and follow the normal standards when it comes to, as individuals, right? Take care of yourself, be healthy, right? Being healthy is very important. Social distance, right? Do all these things. The wearing of the mask, right? If we're in the crowd, do all those basic things, right? Yes, that even itself is being debated in some, but just do it as an individual, right? You know, if we're out there in the public, take those basics, and we have to, let's follow precautions and not lock down, you know, and shut down the economy, and therefore, you know, destroying people's lives. I don't think that's the way to go forward. We already have the vaccines that have come through right now. We'll see what the process, how the process unfolds, and how many people are being vaccinated. and we shall see how that relates to, to the reopening of the economy, people getting confidence to go back into participating in the economy. We shall see how those things unfold. But for now, the fact is that we don't lockdowns under the way. You can't call that as the way to solve the issue, because that's not the solution.
Absolutely.
You are causing the greatest harm.
And I would agree with you, Phumlani, because as a final thought, I must move us on, guys, to other topics. But one of the things, the state-centric approach of lockdowns and politicians taking over, the one thing it's done, unfortunately, a negative externality, that's convinced ordinary people that they don't have to take responsibility at all. That it should be the state that takes responsibility even for my own personal health, insofar as directing me through force as to what I should and shouldn't do. And if I just do these things, if I just comply, you often hear some people say, even shoving it in your face when you don't comply, that, I will protect others and I'll protect myself. And then people get surprised when they themselves, after complying, after following all the rules, become sick, and many even die from that. So it's been, if there's one thing this lockdown has done, it has been to raise the consciousness of some people to say that actually my health is my responsibility. I need to follow a certain set of things and not trust politicians to make decisions, because we've seen what also that looks like in terms of a comedy of errors, from vaccines messed up, from supposedly getting the healthcare up to a system where it can handle the waves, and then also shutting that down. All of these things that have been done by the state. Guys, I must move us on. I know I'm sure you guys want to chip in even more there, but I must look at something which is, I think has gotten lost in the noise of COVID and lockdown and the like, which is this expropriation bill, perhaps the single greatest threat to the life, liberty, and property rights in particular of South Africans. Duwayne, I'm going to begin with you only because the IRR have been one of the loudest voices just this week in terms of the news cycle of pushing back against this expropriation bill. Firstly, what is this bill and why is it such a big danger?
Well, the expropriation bill is essentially what will allow the government to expropriate property without compensation. Now, what many people don't understand is that expropriation in itself is not a big issue, because a lot of countries around the world, a lot of states around the world has expropriation in their constitution. For instance, the US has what they call eminent domain, which allows the state to essentially expropriate private property when they need it for the public interest. For, let's say, for instance, the state wants to build a bridge or a road, and you have private property that's in the way, they can then essentially take your property, but with compensation. That's the key difference. This bill will allow the South African state to take private property, and the key word here is property, not land, because many people mistake property with land, and this is not exclusively about land. Patricia de Lille and all of the members of cabinet have been lying to South Africans and saying this is only about land. Don't worry, we're only going to target white farmers and the middle class and whoever. This is about all property, intellectual property, any assets that you own, including shares and equities. It can be taken under this bill. The bill says explicitly not limited to land. So this bill will then essentially take power from the people and put it into the hands of politicians. And that's an extremely dangerous scenario, because we must always be careful of the toys that we hand to politicians.
Absolutely. Martin, I must come to you because I know you've written quite extensively on this issue. And Phumlani, I'm going to come to you too because I know you're quite vocal on this issue. Martin, according to the bill, that's the expropriation bill, it may be, quote, it may be just equitable for nil compensation, that's zero compensation to be paid or not to be paid technically, for expropriated land, which bullet point is unused, that is land that is unused and being held in the hope of appreciating in value over time. That's one metric that it sets. Or land that has been abandoned by failing to exercise control over it. Now, the third bullet point out of 5 is land that poses a health, safety, or physical risk to others. The fourth bullet point is land which is worthless, according to the state, or is worth less, than the state subsidies from which it has benefited. And of course, the last one, land which is owned by a state-owned entity, which is not using it and consents to this expropriation. It's funny how SOEs are allowed to consent on the issue of expropriation, but seemingly everybody else isn't. Martin?
Yeah, so let me just say this by way of introduction to the expropriation, not just the expropriation bill, but also the Constitution 18th Amendment bill, which is going to
Yes.
allow government constitutionally to enact the expropriation bill and then to expropriate property without compensation. If government follows through with this to its they not only enact the law, but they also implement it as its text that you just read allows it to, then we are, as a collective South African nation, we are going to think back longingly to the good old days of level 5 of the lockdown. Because then we are going to experience what Venezuelans were experiencing before COVID-19 was even a thing. We are going to
Yeah.
be eating our beloved pets that we've loved for many years for dinner. We are going to storm zoos to steal animals to eat.
Mm.
Because that
Mm.
is what happens when you adopt the principle that government must own land, which is somewhat almost a logical outflow of expropriation without compensation. But now,
Mm.
to get more specific on those grounds that you've mentioned, obviously the first thing is that those grounds are not the only ones. The IRR has made a very big deal of this, and I think rightly so. It is an open list. It means government can, in any circumstance, literally any circumstance, can say,
That's right.
in these circumstances, we think it is just and equitable to expropriate without compensation. So these 5 grounds that you just listed are actually a way for government to mislead international investors, to mislead local investors, to say, look, don't worry. It's only in these 5 circumstances that you really need to be concerned. Only
Mm.
eagle-eyed lawyers notice the little trick that they're pulling, but probably the worst out of all 5 of those grounds that you listed is the abandoned one. So just I don't want to
Exactly.
bore the watchers with the viewers with jurisprudence, but under common law, under our ordinary common law, it is lawful to take abandoned property. That makes sense. If you throw something to the curb, you don't want it anymore. If someone else picks it up, it's theirs. You've abandoned it. So that makes sense. I wrote in the very early days of the proposals for EWC, I said, if government wants to expropriate property without compensation, sure, abandon property, go for it. What are they doing now? They are redefining what it means for property to be abandoned. They said that it would be abandoned if you are failing to exercise control over your property. Now, for ordinary
Mm.
people, this is just a bunch of legalese, but this essentially means, and I'll explain it by way of an example. You are woken up one evening by a band of thieves, a gang of thieves, of robbers. You are taken out of your bed. You're taken off your property and you're thrown to the curb on the street outside. And they say, this is our house now. You jump up, you say, no, this is my house, but they lock you out. You go to
Mm.
court, you institute proceedings, you go to the police, you do all these things that one would do if you are kicked out of your own property. But then
Mm.
comes Minister Patricia de Lille, and she says, interesting. The owner is standing outside of the property. The owner is not exercising control over the property. That property seems abandoned to me. So she
That's
will
crazy.
go and she will kick out the thieves. So that's great. But then that will become the property of the state and the Department of Public Works, and you will
Mm.
get zip for that property. That is what the government is trying to do with that one ground. And there are many things to say about all 4 the other grounds as well. But I think this is the most ridiculous ground that really shows you that the government is not approaching this the way you'd expect any other government, really, in at least in the
Mm.
West, when they engage in expropriation. They're not trying to get you. They're not trying to undermine you. They think expropriation is a legitimate thing to do. I disagree, but
Mm.
they still do it in the public interest. But our government is doing this for you can see it's malicious. There's a real sense of we're gonna get you, citizens. We're gonna show you we're the state, we're politicians, we're powerful. That is what this bill really tells me. And really, if there's anything that we need to be paying attention to, it is not only the expropriation bill, but the amendment of the constitution to allow it. And that, aside from COVID-19 and the lockdown, really needs to be our number one focus. Because if they achieve what they're trying to achieve with expropriation without compensation and other bad parts of this bill, I think we're gonna feel that COVID was very mild economically and as it relates to civil liberties, and we're gonna want to go back to those days. No, let's rally around freedom and around property rights and tell government to back the hell off.
Yo, guys, and I'll come to you just now, Phumlani, but I just want to remind us of a quote by Adam Smith, a very nice, instructive quote, just riding off of what Martin said, this idea of doing something in the public good, which is often what you'll hear the political elites and really the broad left saying. Adam Smith basically says, in The Wealth of Nations, if you're interested, dear viewer, I've never known much good done by those who are affected to trade for the public good. Notice how he says affected to trade, people who claim to trade for the good of others. And he says, and I repeat this, I've never known much good to be done by those who are affected to trade for the public good. Phumlani, I must come to you because there's a broader debate here, a broader discussion, and one which talks to often what I call is the ideas that I push out of who benefits in a free, prosperous, property-owning and non-racial society. Who benefits? Should it be the individual and really families, or should it be the political elites and states? And to this point, when you then look at a question like that of who benefits, I asked you who will be affected the most, by this bill. There are enormous ramifications, Phumlani. This bill is essentially targeting the 1 million white South Africans who own property. And here's the part that most people don't understand or don't know much of. There are 8.7+ million black South Africans who also own property in this country. And those South Africans are just as much in the crosshairs of politicians. So that when a politician says, no, we're only going to do this to the white settlers, they say, this derogatory term they have for white Africans, they do this because they're trying to suggest that it's a racial issue. But clearly it's not when you have this many black South Africans who currently own land, and of course the millions more who want to own land, Phumlani. How does a bill like this interfere with that aspiration of wanting to be a property owner in the country of your birth?
Look, you see, if you want to become a prosperous society, if you want to create wealth, right? If you want people to develop, increase their standards of living, you've got to have a country where there is private, property rights and where they are secured,
Absolutely.
right? You can't. You see the idea, what the ANC and its EFF, because when it comes to this issue, they're on the same bed. So what these guys are trying to, the message they sent to us is that, no, this should be to try, and as you just said earlier, Sitlem, that we are just going to, it's white people's lands. And usually they speak about farms, these will be farms and so on. Whereas when you look at the act, as Martin was interpreting, when you look at the act, it affects everybody, right? Including black people, right? Mm-hmm. So when the law is there, everybody will be affected and everybody will be sort of, they are going to lose their property and they'll be in a situation where they have no control of their property. And what does that do? And in economics, that basically kills incentives, right? Absolutely. I mean, if something is not yours, you're not going to develop it, to create more value, right? Or you're not going to, you can't even transact with it, right? When you look at the Free Market Foundation, their Kalami program, it's a very beautiful Kalami program, because what it does is that it goes into these poor sort of townships where people really have never owned property there, where it was an apartheid sort of project where black people couldn't own the property and they were put there and they are staying in a place basically they can't own. So you have a granny 70, she's staying in a small house somewhere and basically she doesn't own that, right? She could basically be, be booted out. And if you have a program like Kalami, where you'd say those people, that granny must have the title deed, right? Must own that property. So they can do anything with it, leave it for their grandkids or transact with it, do whatever, right? So you are creating incentives there, and you need incentives. You need incentives in the economy so that you can try and bring about wealth creation. So the whole thing, and the whole thing is it's manipulation by the ANC. They manipulate the people by the language, and trying to make them think that, well, this won't affect you. it's going to affect this small group of people, and that's not the case. And it's a sad situation because, I mean, if we've seen how damaging government control and government ownership has been in South Africa over the past 25 years. So now we are saying, okay, we should have more government ownership. That's the case in South Africa. There's never a cutback, right? So if something isn't working, put more of it. So it does make sense to me as why we're going down that route. So I mean,
Absolutely.
we need a serious pushback from organizations and from men like you, Duwayne, Martin, and many others out there to say, no, we cannot accept this. If you want to transform and change people's lives, then something like Kalami program of the Free Market Foundation is something that government should try and look into to help the people, the poor people out there. And the majority of those people are black people, right? This is a black majority country. So you will be affecting the change that you are looking for, but it can't be the state ownership as change that we need. Can't be that.
Absolutely, Phumlani, you're spot on. And guys, just give me a moment here to remind the dear viewer, Sanmonani, hello, how's it? And shalom, welcome to it. You're watching Liberty and Friends, the Sunday evening show, every Sunday at 8 p.m. that wraps up the news week and provides deeper analysis and insights as you've been listening. I'm joined, of course, in studio by Martin van Staden from the Free Market Foundation, Duwayne Esau from the Institute of Race Relations, and of course, independent analyst and economics and politics guru, Phumlani Majozi. Welcome to it if you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube. Guys, drive the likes up. Please like the video, drive those likes up and share it, please. Guys, we've touched on what I believe is a bit of a central nerve here, generally speaking. Phumlani rightly describing it as this march by the state, by the government, the political elites towards more state control, more the centralizing of power in the hands of a small elite. Whereas a free society, a prosperous society, a property-owning society should be heading in the other direction, where actually it's the individual who's elevated. And really, I talk a lot about the individual, but really we're a family society, and that ownership often takes the form of families being able to say, we own this. This belongs to Majozis, the Van Stadens, or the Esaus, or even the Ngobese family. Guys, that's on the issue of property rights, the Expropriation Bill. But let's segue a little bit to another state-controlled or state-owned facet of our lives, which has had terrible effects on people's lives. And these are the more than 300 state-owned enterprises, state-owned businesses in this country. I'll use Eskom as the current example because, hey, who knows? Correction. I was about to say, who knows, maybe some of my viewers are sitting in darkness, but I know load shedding or rolling blackouts have been suspended. And I think we should tip our hats in thanking our great overlords in the state for blessing us electricity. But, I'm being facetious, but, there is a serious problem here, Martin, of what has been the march towards this ideological crusade by the ANC, the EFF, and really most of our political elites for more state ownership, more state control. In fact, we've had a 27-year conversation now about the state owning things and, it having control and very little in the way of a conversation about actually breaking the state up and putting power into people's hands. Eskom, load shedding, is this an inevitable consequence of state ownership and incompetence in trying to run businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, and you're correct. It's totally ideological because if it weren't, then they would say we need Eskom, and I would say, okay, well, fair enough. But we're gonna let private competitors enter the market and provide power to those willing to pay for it. There's none of that. You have to apply for a license to provide power in this country, and I think the Minister of Energy just laughs at any power company that even puts in an application. I know that in the late 1990s, early 2000s, various international power corporations from France and so on were lining up in South Africa ready to build power stations, good, nice coal power stations. Let me just emphasize coal. We need coal. We have coal in this country. We need coal power stations. Goodness me, stop worrying about these wind turbines and things. Do that,
That's right.
but coal, guys. They were ready to provide power in this country, and the government at the last moment, so they adopted a white paper saying we're going to open up the market, and then at the last moment they said, actually, no, I don't think so. We're not going to open up the market. We're good. And then the rest is history. We know Eskom in 2008 said, actually, no, we're not good at all. And then we saw the inevitable conclusion of a result of what happens when you try and nationalize something. Now, of course, around the world, you have examples of state-owned monopolies that work, that are quite efficient, but you can't just look at that society in that moment. You need to look at the history of that society. You will see it's a very prosperous and rich country that had a free market, probably for most of its history, that built up a very, very large amount of wealth, and built up a very high degree of social capital, where social capital and social trust, where corruption is swiftly dealt with. We have none of that in South Africa. None of it. We shouldn't delude ourselves into thinking, if we just have the right president, then everything will just magically come right and Eskom will provide us with power and corruption will be dealt with. No, it's nonsense. We are, on a good day, we're decades behind. On a realistic day, we're probably centuries behind, even having close to the amount of social trust, social capital, and wealth in this country for that to even be on our radar. So forget about that. We need to we should privatize SOEs, but we don't have to. What we have to do is we need to allow free competition in the market. We need to allow ordinary South Africans to provide power for themselves, for their neighbors, for their communities, and not this nonsense where I think Eskom now wants to tax people who have solar panels because, oh dear Lord, they're stealing money from Eskom by providing power for themselves. Whatever will we do? No, we really need, you used a great term earlier, state-centric. We need far less state-centrism in this country. We need to realize that the South African people are the important part, not the state. And that is how we're going to, that's the only way really, how we're going to solve our electricity crisis. We need competitors,
Absolutely.
we need ordinary South Africans to have the right to provide for their own power.
Absolutely. Duwayne, I must bring you in. Because again, this is a key conversation to have in a country where I've been telling anybody who's willing to listen, I've been telling them that it doesn't get better going forward. You know, there is no magic wand that will come and save us. Excuse me. There is no magic wand that will come and fix the state-owned enterprises. And that instead, what the average South African should be doing is, within their means, of course, preparing themselves for what is effectively the collapse of various state-owned enterprises that control all of these key services. And Martin rightly pointed out that there is an awareness of this from government and the political elites. Hence, they're starting to talk the language of, let's introduce a licensing regime, or let's introduce a tax that goes after that individual who tries to be self-sufficient. Your thoughts generally on the load shedding, and I know the Institute has written before, I might be putting you on the spot here, but I know the Institute has written before around what some initiatives that we can put in place to free ourselves from the bondage of state-owned enterprises. Do you want to quickly give a review?
Yes, well, obviously, as a South African that has been sort of stuck with load shedding since I think for the last 10 years now, since the start of the Zuma administration, I believe load shedding has been back and has never left us since. And I think, as everyone in this conversation, and I believe everyone watching, I'm sick of it. I'm tired of it. It's an annoyance. It's something that should not occur, because in any functioning society, load shedding is not even a term. I actually have a funny story regarding load shedding. My brother was on playing on Xbox Live the other day, and he often plays with people from other countries, and he had to tell them, sorry guys, I have to log off, and they wanted to know why, because load shedding was going to happen in about 10-15 minutes, and they were like, what, load shedding? And he explained to them, and he's about 13 years old now, and he said, guys, load shedding is when your electricity gets put off, but you didn't put it off, the government puts it off. And I was like, power to you, man. I'm taking him in the right direction. But anyway, you are right, really pointing out that the Institute does have a few suggestions that I think it's just common sense. As Phumlani earlier mentioned, in an economy, you need incentives if you want things to be productive. And our suggestion is, open up the energy market so that private companies can enter, and that will incentivize them to produce energy at a lower price. The problem with SOEs is that the government is always there as a backup to pay the bill. The government is always there. They know this, and that's why there's no incentive to perform efficiently. There's no incentive to use the money at their disposal wisely.
Absolutely.
And so they always end up needing a bailout because the government will always give them a bailout. If the Minister of Finance said tomorrow, guys, we're putting bailouts to an end and we are privatizing the SOEs, or not even privatizing, we keep them there as a sort of buffer to protect those who can't afford, and just to sort of to have that balance in the market, because we all know markets do fail, but they should not be sort of controlling the industry. That's the issue here. It's not that SOEs are a bad thing in and of itself, but if they have a monopoly over the industry, then obviously we all know, as lovers of liberty and individual freedom, monopolies are a bad thing for liberty and for individual freedom.
A few things I disagree with, but your thoughts, like, again, how do we bring up, firstly, how do we free the citizen to become more self-sufficient, and what do we need? I think Duwayne rightly said, you've got to open up the market. There's no way in which you can think a small band of people within a centralized bureaucracy can somehow know what an economy of billions of transactions daily will need in terms of energy production and the like. Opening up the market, Phumlani?
Yeah, but before I address that, I want to go back to what Martin said, of which I slightly disagree with him. He says that we don't have to privatize them, the SOEs, but we just need to open up the market. I think we need to privatize them because, I mean, if we keep them existing, it means that, and the moment we bring more competitors, they will suffer. But we as taxpayers will pay for it, right? We'll continue. We will continuously have to pay for them, right? And we're paying for businesses that are inefficient. And we are in a situation where you have poor people paying taxes. Well, they do pay taxes, when poor people in the form of VAT, and they're financing people who are flying with, SAA. So I mean, you are busy. We are busy financing businesses that are failing. So no, I want them privatized. There is no need for the state to own businesses, right? The state should let private individuals own businesses, collect taxes from them, because you all pay taxes, and then do many things, right, in terms of developing the country, right, where there must be things done. So I mean, so that's one. That's just one thing I wanted to cover. And then the key thing around the market. People tend to say, people for some reason think that wherever there are inefficiencies or imperfections, in the market, therefore there has to be a state ownership, right? There is much that we've just been speaking about Eskom. The case that the advocates of government control when it comes to Eskom, the advocates of the controls or Eskom, who want Eskom to survive and continue going as the monopoly. Well, it's because we want everybody to have electricity, right? Everybody must have electricity, even the poor must have. So that's why we have the state providing. I'm saying you don't need that. You don't need, if that's the question of subsidy, right? If you want the state government to subsidize people's consumption, right? It's fine. That's okay if you want to have that. But what would happen is that government would somehow sort of subsidize those people so that those people can consume electricity from the market, right? Can buy power from the market, from competitors, which is what Martin has been talking about. So, I mean, there are ways at which you can address that situation. And the most important thing I want to say is this. Not all of us can afford cars, right? We don't have, there's been no point in human history where everybody afforded a specific commodity. If you cannot afford electricity for some reasons, look, man, I started living in a house with electricity when I was plus minus 12 years old, right? I'm from rural areas of KZN. When I was growing up, we were using the candle, right? Living with my granny and all that. Yet in those plus minus 13 years of my living, right, I had gone through the school education. I had done many things as a young person at the time, right? So life was there, even though we didn't have power, right? So, I mean, for those who can't afford, yes, they may be looking to subsidizing, but even if that fails, if you can't afford, there is life, even if you can't afford electricity. It doesn't mean that the whole country now needs to be in a situation where we have the state owning power and therefore occasionally facing blackouts. And by the way, the recessions we've had over the past 2 years or so, Eskom has been a huge factor in the economic recession that we've had, right? Mining, manufacturing, and all these sort of key industries that we have, they've been affected. There's been a huge impact from these, Eskom power outages. So, I mean, for me, it's a matter of just privatize things. And if there's a necessity for government to help the poor, it must be some form of subsidies, of which those poor people, they buy the power from a competitive market, right? Because what the market does, that it controls the prices as well. If you have a monopoly like this, like we have right now, and especially it's a government monopoly, we're in a sort of a tough one because we are going to face the blackouts and eventually have more than 11 million people who are sitting at home partly because of these continuous sort of, power outages that we see that affect the economy.
Guys, I must take a moment here because we are at 2 minutes to 9, and I did say this is only going to be an hour long. Can I please ask your permission, please, for 15 extra minutes so that I can also bring in the viewers? Are you guys okay with that? So that we end the show at 9:15. Is that okay?
Yeah,
that's fine. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate that, guys. 15 minutes. I want to keep this conversation going up until 9:15. It is 9 o'clock now. You're watching Liberty and Friends with me, Big Dad Liberty. I've got Martin Phumlani from the Free Market Foundation, Duwayne Esau from the IRR, and of course, independent analyst and really a guru on all things economics and politics, Phumlani Majozi on the show. This is the first ever episode. I really appreciate the 453 of you on Facebook who are watching. I can't see how many there are of you on YouTube. Welcome to it, guys. This is the last 15 minutes. I'm opening the lines up, an open mic session, if you will. I'm going to open this open mic session with a bit of a funny one. Not really a serious issue, but something that dominated the headlines for the week. And I called it in a vlog that I did, another one of these dribbling and distracting attempts by politicians who are attention whores of note. In this case, one Julius Malema and Jacob Zuma meeting for tea, a very funny tea party, Martin. Not one I've come to understand if I look at the American example of what the tea party is. Martin?
No, I wish that we had a real tea party in this country, but I don't think we're there yet. Yeah, for those who don't know, the tea party is when you take government's property and you throw it in the river and you take liberty for yourself. But in South Africa, the tea party is someone who apparently hates Jacob Zuma and has built a substantial part of his political career around hating Jacob Zuma, essentially going to Jacob Zuma and from what I read in the city press on their front page, I think it was today or in the last week, essentially plotting with Zuma to take out Cyril Ramaphosa and the so-called ostensible reformer faction in the ANC. These people think South African voters are a joke, seriously. And I'm sorry, I as a general rule, I don't want to offend people, and I'm sincere about that. But if you are an EFF voter, and you are going to vote for if you vote for the EFF again, I mean, come on, seriously, just do a little bit better, just a little bit better. Vote for the ANC again. That's fine. Vote for the ANC. But if you're gonna vote for the EFF, you are. I'm sorry. You are. I'm not gonna say what you are, but just don't, please. Your leader thinks you're an idiot. Your leader thinks you're an idiot. Do not play into that. He is he and Zuma and the ANC. They think we're all stupid, and they're doing this in broad daylight, and they're smiling about it as the press takes pictures of them drinking tea. We need to show them that we have a better political culture in this country. Really, don't give them your support.
Phumlani, I must come to you. Then I'll come to you just now. But this definitely was a coalition of the crooked, wasn't it? Insofar as, Mzwali Lemasina, Julius Malema, Vuyani Pambo, who of course was part, his claim to fame was being a part of the Fees Must Fall cronies who disrupted and destroyed infrastructure tertiary institutions infrastructure in this country. Oh my goodness, they even had, for the life of me, I can't remember his name now, convicted of drunken driving. I can't remember his name, but essentially it was a coalition of the crooked and broadly these people who are called the RET crowd, the Radical Economic Transformation crowd. Why are they a big danger to the sustainability and the prosperity of this nation? The sort of leftist ideas that come to us in the guise of radical economic transformation.
Well, you see, when you look at Zuma, when Zuma lost in I would say Zuma, because I mean his preferred candidate lost in the December 2017 and Nasrec the conference where Cyril Ramaphosa won. Basically, the platform those people, the Zuma faction, were running on was this radical RET, which you've just mentioned right now. This idea of a radical state control and state ownership and state manipulation of the market, whatever you want to call it. So that was the platform that they were sort of running on. So on an ideological sort of point of view or aspect, they aren't that different from what Julius Malema wants. You're right. You know, when you go for things like, you know, free education and all these things, and states as a service provider. So they aren't that different. It was quite a strange kind of an alliance that we are seeing this week, and it goes back to basically touching on what Martin was saying, that really you shouldn't trust politicians, right? If you were one of those people who were sort of after Julius Malema and the team, who for the past 3 years before, when the last, I don't know what, 3 years before Zuma left, where they were disrupting the parliament almost in every session to remove Jacob Zuma, right? Because he was this evil kind of man, pay back the money, right? All those slogans. Now he's in an alliance now, or at least he's trying to form this friendship or this partnership with Zuma, who, I mean, they've accused repeatedly for corruption, right? And we all know there are cases around Jacob Zuma. So if you are an EFF supporter, you've been fooled, and you've been disrespected, right? And as Martin say, perhaps do a little bit better, you know, a little better by rather returning to the ANC if you hate the DA so much in other political parties, right? So I mean, we've been fooled, but at one point, someone once said that, you know, there are no permanent enemies in politics, right? So you'll be surprised when you see people who, for the years, have been at least in public platforms claiming to be enemies. Suddenly now they are partnering, right? So we are seeing that sort of that dynamic here at play. That and it seems to me, given the nature of how the EFF thinks and how they see Cyril Ramaphosa, because whenever Julius Malema speaks about Cyril Ramaphosa, there are many derogatory kind of insulting things he say, from his accent, being someone who was, you know, so they will align with this faction to try for some reason to undermine and push back against, you know, the Ramaphosa faction, which in my view, you know, my sort of dream, or my sort of, you know, what I wish to happen is to see the ANC getting weaker and weaker. So if we see those things taking place, that's okay. I mean, we need a weaker ANC now with this country, so we are able to move forward. We've seen what a stronger ANC can do. You know, we do have the evidence of that. We saw how they kept Jacob Zuma even if the nation had enough of him, right? So I mean, those are things that are quite troubling with this alliance, and don't really be surprised if it gains ground. As he said, they want to sort of align and be an alliance against Ramaphosa and that faction. So it's going to gain ground.
I must throw this to Duwayne, just as a final point, and then I must go to questions and comments, guys. I'll throw the comments to you guys. But Duwayne, there's 3 key points that have been made really in the commentary here, aside from my joking and stuff. It's hashtag politicians are trash, and it really is a case of hashtag politicians are damn trash. The second is these are commies. I saw a comment from Diane. Diane Salt, a big fan of the show. Shout out to you, Diane. I see you. Say never trust a commie. You know, another hashtag I often sort of talk about a lot. And when you look at these individuals, and especially that photo and with their grinning ear to ear like Cheshire cats, they're exactly that. Ideologically, these are red in tooth and claw socialists and communists that we're talking about here. A coalition of the crooked. Duwayne, your thoughts?
Oh yes, no, definitely, without a doubt. I think people confuse sort of the ideology of the likes of Julius Malema and the likes of Jacob Zuma for a sort of, I don't know, a sort of African version of socialism or communism. But there really is only one. There is only communism and there is only socialism. There's no African version. And whatever they tell you, these radical economic transformation types, it's all lies. It's about power and control. And birds of the same feather flock together, and as we've seen, they have come together. I mean, who even knows if Julius Malema and Jacob Zuma were ever really enemies? I mean, we don't know what they do in their private time. It's quite interesting that they came together now to meet after all these years of rivalry, to have a sort of wonderful tea party and a coalition. Helen Ziller calls it when people who have a sort of mutual hate of someone come together. Helen Ziller loves to call it a coalition of the aggrieved. And I think Julius Malema and Jacob Zuma have been aggrieved by the ANC. They are upset at the ANC because Julius was pushed out at one point, and now I think Jacob is being pushed out. So I think they're coming together to try and plot their way in.
Absolutely. And again, I must answer the questions here, guys. Great insight so far. If you're watching, we're in the last sort of 6-7 minutes or so of the show. We did extend by another 15 minutes. Thank you to my guests for allowing me that grace. Guys, I'm going to keep an eye on the comments. They do fly very quickly. Christian Pedigro, Perdigao, excuse me. Imagine thinking the likes of Trump would be good for any country. Smooth brain thinking. Okay, I think there's another chat generally debate happening in the group, as always happens in this case. Guys, send your questions through. If you have any particular questions you want me to throw to the panelists, you're watching Liberty and Friends, the first episode of the show. I'm just going to keep an eye on the comments section. Diane Salt, just a comment coming through. Ace Mahashule would be the worst of the worst. Terry Lee Hauer saying, correct, Duwayne, obviously responding to your last question. Lynette Dorkin has a question. How do we get the majority of the poorly educated to understand how the ANC have destroyed this country? Just hold on to that question, guys. And Vernon Niger says, sorry, Vernon, your question flew up quite quickly. The EFF always know we always know are the ANC Youth League in exile. We should not consider them separate to the EFF. Let me throw that one to you, Phumlani, first, just very briefly. 2 or 3 interventions that you think, that ordinary people can marshal to push back against this. And I'll throw that same question to all of you guys as I look for another question.
You see, there's one sort of messaging that could sort of persuade people to think otherwise when it comes to the ANC. I think it's the highlighting of what a failure the state has been, right, in their lives. And I think for me that if you are going to talk about the issues that these people face every day, and you point and you say it's because the state has failed in XYZ, I think that could make an impact. But as Martin also said earlier, the idea of coming together, mobilizing against things like the load shedding that we are seeing, the lockdowns that we are seeing, all things that affect people's livelihoods. So all those things we can mobilize against them as citizens. But I think from a messaging point of view, we need to highlight how much state failure we've had over the past 2 decades of our democracy. I think that's very important. If we hit that very hard, the message can gain ground.
Absolutely. Martin, I'm going to come to you now. There was a quick comment I want to just quickly get out here. Nick saying, how about we stop calling them uneducated? I agree with you, Nick. This idea that just because someone disagrees with my particular viewpoint or doesn't know my particular viewpoint, they are uneducated. We need to sort of get that condescending notion that we sometimes have of fellow South Africans out, especially if you're trying to then make the argument that you're winning, you want to win them on the argument and rally them to your side. But Martin, how do we get that message out, if you will? And you already spoke to these points early on.
Yeah, so let me make 3 brief points. Number 1, the ANC does not govern with a majority of the electorate of this country. It governs with a 32% majority of the electorate. The others do not vote. Most South Africans who are eligible to vote, 18 and above, do not vote. So to say that the ANC, the majority stands with the ANC, is incorrect. They are a democratic government because the majority of voters vote for them. So I'm not saying that it's an illegitimate government, but we need to remember that most people do not vote for the ANC. Most people do not vote, period. So that's the first thing to remember, and I think goes into that point about don't be condescending. Don't say, oh, they are just going to vote ANC again. They tend to not vote at all. Yes, so bear that in mind. Second point, I mentioned this earlier. We shouldn't want to convince the majority of anything. That it's too difficult. Don't try it. You're going to. It's not going to work. Don't try it. Convince the people in your circle. Convince one person. Find one guy in the street. Talk to him, convince him, then you have done a massive job. That guy could be a loudspeaker in his own community. Do not try and convince the majority. It can't work. Absolutely. And the third thing is, I think there's a kind of irresistible allure from what the trade union Solidarity is doing. And that is, they've basically said, you know what, we do not care what the government thinks. We don't care what the government says. We're going to do our own thing. And they just built a university for a very cheap price of 300 million rand, while the Gauteng ANC's Department of Education spent 450 million rand on sanitizing empty schools. So I think there's something to be said for community initiatives to just say, you know what, the state has failed. Let's just take control of our own security. Let's forget that the police even exist. Let's secure ourselves. And I think that slowly but surely people, they may say, oh, Solidarity is racist, which they aren't, but they may say that, but somewhere in their subconscious, I think they're like, wow, what these guys have done is actually is monumental. And I think that slow trickle could translate into an awakening of most South Africans at some stage to just say, you know what, we don't even care what the president is going to say to us in his address tonight. We're just going to carry on and be free.
And all power to Solidarity. Duwayne, I must give you the last word. We've run out of time. How do people push back? And maybe what campaigns are the IRR running people can be a part of?
Oh, yes. People can push back against, as you mentioned earlier, the monopoly of Eskom. The IRR currently has a campaign on Eskom. So we have a petition that people can add their names to on the Institute's website, which is, of course, www.irr.org.za. And on there, you can go to the campaigns page and add your voice to the 2 campaigns that we are sort of running at the moment, which is the Power to the People campaign, which is about Eskom. And then we have the Kill the Bill campaign, or the Stop EWC campaign, which is essentially opposing the Expropriation Bill. We have so far encouraged thousands of South Africans to add their voice to this. And I must sort of emphasize that this is the most important one, simply because the deadline for comment was extended last week to the 28th of February. It was previously the 10th of February, I believe, which means people now have more time to add their voice to this campaign. And on social media, I sort of got the response when I posted about this that, you know, what's the use of this? The government doesn't listen to us. I just want to point out a small example of where it did actually work. Last year, the government wanted to introduce electronic voting through the Electoral Laws Amendment Bill, but the Institute of Race Relations was one of the organizations opposed to this, with many others such as DSA and other organizations. And we got thousands of people to comment within 1 week. We had sort of this huge push because our head of policy research, Dr. Anthea Jeffrey, many of you will know her, of course, an astute thinker and policy researcher. She spotted this and said this will essentially hand over all control to the IEC, which is by default controlled by the ANC. And then we got the government to remove that clause from the bill, which is a huge thing. I mean, people added their voice in the government, so people are actually opposed to this. So your comment, just sort of writing one sentence and adding your email and your name and surname, saying I'm against this bill, I don't want this to become the law, can actually make a big difference, guys. So go to the website, add your voice to this campaign, and liberty really is sort of it's a never-ending battle. And if you can add your voice to it, as Martin said, get involved, and Phumlani also made the point, get involved. If you can convince one person, I beg your pardon, they can convince another person. You don't have to convince thousands of people. Just do it with one person.
Absolutely. Guys, I must end it off there. And with that being said, a major thanks to my guest, the first inaugural panel of Liberty and Friends. That's Martin from Staden, of course, from the Free Market Foundation, Duwayne Esau, who's from the Institute of Race Relations, and of course, Phumlani Majozi, who is an independent analyst and researcher, and really a mind who comments on a lot of social, political, and economic things in the country. Guys, thank you very much. I'm going to let you go on the stream. And as I'm busy, as I'm busy doing that, if it will allow me, there we go. Let me say thank you, dear viewer, for having joined us on this particular stream. I really, really appreciate it. With that being said, you can remember to find me on, trapped by my own sentence construction there. Let me revisit what I'm trying to say. Guys, the Big Daddy Liberty Show comes to you effectively 3 times a week through various vlogs, as and when topical things happen. Every Wednesday, 7 p.m., the flagship Big Daddy Liberty Show itself. This week, we're going to look at, or next week, we're going to look at lockdowns. Do they work? So interesting guests that I'm busy trying to line up for that. Of course, every Sunday, the show, Liberty and Friends. There'll be a different panel next week. Hopefully, I'll have Ivo Vegter on for next week's show. Guys, thanks for watching. Let me wrap it up here. And a reminder to you, as I always do at the end of the show, never trust a commie.